Hello, good day. I am Maricel Rojas, and today I'll be discussing about ethnography. So, what is ethnography all about? So, ethnography is a qualitative research method that involves immersing oneself in a particular culture or community to study its social and cultural practices. So, ethnographers typically spend extended period of time in the field observing and participating in the lives of the people they are studying. So, this allowed them to gain a depth understanding of the culture from the perspective of its member. As stated that ethnography studies and understand the cultures and practices of various group of people, there's similarities between ethnography and indigenous research method. So both ethnography and indigenous research method often involves in participant observation. So researchers immerse themselves in a community they study, actively participating in and observing daily lives, tradition, and practices of the people. So here, pwede silang like yung sa Filipino Indigenous Research Method, pwede silang makipagkwentuhan. So it's like this method involved engaging in formal conversation with a community member to learn about their experience or yung pakikisama. So this method involves participating in a community activities and events to build relationship and gain a deeper understanding of the community's culture. Or lastly, yung panunuluyan. So this method involves living with the community for an extended period of time in order to gain a more intimate understanding of their daily lives. So in summary, ethnography and indigenous research methods share common elements like participants' observation and focus on context. However, the indigenous research method in Filipino context are distinct kasi they put emphasis on decolonization and community ownership and cultural sensitivity. The historical and philosophical context of ethnography. So, as a research technique intended to describe the culture of participants' social groups, ethnographic techniques were employed by anthropologists. So, there's this anthropologist who investigated the sexual practices of island people in Pacific and Polynesian island, respectively. The other definition of ethnography is a participant's observation. So, since anthropologists use ethnography to immerse themselves in the culture of the society under the investigation in order to describe life in the culture in depth. Contemporary ethnography belong to the tradition of naturalism, so in which they emphasize the importance of understanding the meaning and the cultural practices of people from within everyday context. So this approach draws a Verstian or understanding tradition of interpretative analysis. So naturalism can contrasted to positivism, so which treat people as object of science. Investigations such as researchers aim to eliminate all traces of his or her subjective bias. Example nito is yung emotional response, political beliefs, prejudice, and expectation. So, they aim to take objective, detached scientific stance. Ethnography is variously defined in non-psychology texts, so as form of observation involving qualitative methods of data collection and analysis, and usually a degree of participation by the researcher in the world they are investigating. On the other hand, Hammersley and Atkinson's classic text of ethnography, so it represents its process in which researchers participate overtly or covertly in people's everyday life for a sustained period, watching what happened, listening what is said, asking questions, and collecting any relevant information. So, what are some defining features of ethnographic research? So, Ethnography focuses on cultural interpretation and aims to understand the cultural and symbolic aspect of people's action and the context in which those actions occur. So, the ethnographers pay close attention to symbolic aspect of human behavior. Symbolic can be words, gestures, objects, rituals, or any other cultural expression that carry meaning within the particular group. So, these symbols often convey deep cultural significance and can help researcher uncover the hidden layer of meaning behind action and practices. For example, a handshake might symbol trust and friendship in other culture, while it might carry a different meaning in another. So these are the features of ethnographic approach. The first is shared cultural meanings of a social group are vital for understanding the activities of any social group. So the task of ethnographer researchers is to uncover those meanings. For ethnographic researchers, routine and mundane aspects of everyday life are considered worthy of investigation as research data. The next is attuned to meanings that behaviors, actions, context, and event have from perspective of those involved. So, ethnographic researchers seeks an insider's perspective, aiming to understand the phenomenon from the point of view of those involved, which can be diverse, complex, and contradictory. The next is a specific social group or case will be studied in its natural setting. So, example, um, not in a research laboratory or an artificial, manipulated, or controlled environment. So, a full ethnography involved participants' observation entails the researchers becoming part of this natural setting. The fourth one is relatively loose structure, involving, evolving and developing over time in relation to activities, events, and cultural practices and priorities of the group being studied. So, research questions hypotheses and data collection procedures may develop as the study proceeds. So, although most ethnographic studies do begin with a set of research questions, an overall research design and strategy for data and analysis. The fifth one is the multi-method form of research, including structured or semi-structured questionnaires and or interviews non-participants through to full participant observation. So, can be diaries, film, or video recorded, and official documentary. So, the field work is central to ethnographic approach is which researchers spend substantial period of time in the field. So, working or living alongside research participants in order to immerse themselves fully in the cultural and social milieu of those under investigation. So, the PO or yung participant observation as combining participation in the lives of the people under study. The ethnographic and observational method in psychological research. The first study conducted was the classical marital study. Um, it made a principled decision to become involved in the daily life of the community they were studying in attempt to give something back but also to improve the quality of their empirical work. So, the marital study is notable in its multidisciplinary approach combining sociological and psychological and economic perspective. So, it's so to provide a holistic understanding of how employment affects peoples in both the individual and community level. So, the research method employed including participant observation, surveys, interviews, and historical data analysis. And it allowed the researcher to capture the complex dynamic of a community crisis. So in the marital study, surveys and structured interviews were conducted with the resident of Marital to collect information about their employment history, family, psychological well-being, and social activities. So these surveys and interview were conducted at various points during the study to capture the changes in the residents' experience and their attitude over time. So the researchers engaged in participants' observation, living in the marital, and actively participating in the community. So this involved observing daily life, attending community events, and interacting with the residents to gain a deeper understanding of their experiences and social dynamic of the village. The next one is yung Fistinger study. Examine cult members' response when their cherished belief that the world would end in the catastrophic flood on a specific date was disconfirmed. So, the study was designed to investigate cognitive dissonance theory and the way people rationalize their action when they experience inconsistency between their belief and behavior. So, the cults typically use persuasive technique. So, this is how they recruit and retain members. So, as individuals become more committed to the cult, they may experience cognitive dissonance regarding their past decision and sacrifices they made to be part of the group. So, the next study is the Ross-Hans study. So, field simulation project in which 8 people attempt to gain access as patient to mental hospital in the USA. So, how was the study done? So, David Ross-Han and his collaborator recruited a total of 8 pseudo-patients, including himself, to participate in the study. So, those 8 patients or pseudo-patients were all mentally healthy individuals. So, those pseudo-patients were trained to simulate symptoms of mental illness, particularly auditory hallucination. So, they were instructed to claim that they hear voices saying words like empty, hollow, and tad. So, they admit themselves or presented themselves at various psychiatric hospitals across the USA seeking admission. So, during those admissions process, they presented or they provided accurate personal histories, including their occupation and background, but omitted any history of psychiatric treatment. So, upon admission, those pseudo-patient claim that they are experiencing auditory hallucination as their primary symptoms. So, the pseudo-patient did not exhibit any other sign of symptoms of mental illness during their hospitalization. So, lahat ng 8 na yon were diagnosed. Those pseudo-patient were diagnosed with psychiatric disorders. And the most common one is yung schizophrenia. So, after being admitted, those pseudo-patient stopped stimulating those symptoms, and they start to behave normally. So, they engage in ordinary conversation with the staff and other patient. So, the pseudo-patient careful to record their observation at the hospital environment, noting the behaviors of the staff and the patient. So, during their hospitalization, the pseudo-patient remained at the hospital at a varied length of time, 7 to 52 days. Through their hospitalization, the pseudo-patient made attempt to convince the staff that they were no longer experiencing any symptoms and should be discharged. So, they reported that they are feeling fine and their hallucination has stopped. However, it was challenging to secure the release. So, the hospital staff obtained attribution their improved condition to the medication. The Rosenhan study had lasting impact in field of psychology and psychiatry. So it highlight the limitations of psychiatric diagnosis and need for improved diagnostic criteria. So as well as emphasizing the importance of humane and ethical treatment of individual with mental illnesses. The key issues relative to ethnographic and observational methods. So the first is the representation, engagement, and bias. So that is the researcher's concept and categories of analysis should be emerged from the data and not should be imposed upon it. So, yung representation refers to how individual or group are depicted or portrayed in a various form of media, including television, film, advertising, and social media. So, it involves the depiction of race, gender, sexuality. So, for example, the accurate representation in media means ensuring that the people from the different background are shown in a respectful and authentic manner, and their story are told in a way that reflects their lived experience. So, misinterpretation and underrepresentation can be reinforced stereotypes and perpetuate inequality. The engagement naman refers to the level of interaction, participation, or involvement that individual have with the contact platform communities. The next one is the interpretation and analysis of observational data. So researchers should focus on material relevant to the primary research questions of the study and allow scope for apparent diversion around those themes. So, depending on the topic under investigations, research field notes can focus on key episodes and specific individual or small group, particular event, or combination of these. So, it is important to remember that all methods, techniques for recording research information are necessarily selective. Even video footage cannot ever record all subtleties of human social encounters. The last one is yung ethic, access, deception, and gaining informed consent. So, we have to remindful or need to be remindful na whether there is a harm to participant, whether there is a lack of informed consent, whether there is an invasion of privacy, whether deception is involved. Ethnography has a number of advantages and limitations, but in some cases, its advantages can also operate as limitation. So, the first is there is no design for ethnographic study. So, it is flexible and relatively open structure. So, it can enable researcher to generate original insight and innovative methods. However, because it is very flexible approach, it can be difficult to handle. So, ethnography ethnographic research takes time and therefore relatively expensive compared to other research methods. So, the findings of ethnographic research may not be readily encapsulated into series of bullet points. So, however, the richness, diversity, and complexity of human cultural life from the perspective of insider is likely to be reflected in a good ethnographic research. So, this can generate invaluable insight and contribution to the knowledge that would not emerge using any other research method. So, ethnography can be an excellent first stage in a longer research process, providing a mean of gaining initial insight into the culture of social processes, and it can stand as a distinctive research method. So, that's the end of my presentation regarding ethnography. Thank you for listening.